The medal of St. John was still stuck with blood when Lampião threw it onto the dining table of the Casa Grande. Colonel Belmiro swallowed hard, seeing his own children peeking through the crack in the door. "You see this, Colonel? Even the saints are disgusted with you. Let me tell you a story that's going to shake your soul. Get ready, because this is one of those tales you never forget." The rooster hadn't crowed yet when Maria woke Zé Caboclo with a warm little cup of coffee. It was her habit to rise early and prepare her husband's breakfast. But on that Tuesday morning, something heavy lingered in the air, like rain that refuses to fall. "Zé, are you sure you're going to the colonel to collect today?" she asked, stirring the polenta over the wood-fired stove. "Woman, I've sweated blood on that land for 2 years, 40 sacks of corn, 25 of beans. He owes me 2 contos de res." Zé Caboclo adjusted the medal of St. John on his neck, just as he did every morning since his mother died. "I can't wait any longer. The boys need clothes. You need medicine for that cough." Maria stopped stirring the polenta and looked at her husband. Zé was a thin man, but strong. Calloused hands of a man who knew every inch of land, every secret of planting. His eyes held that kind of honesty that only exists in someone who has never needed to lie to survive. "Then promise me something." She touched his arm. "If the colonel gets violent, you run. Pride doesn't pay for a funeral." Zé laughed and kissed his wife's forehead. "Maria, I'm just going there to talk man to man. The colonel is cruel, but he's not crazy. He knows I'm right." Their 3 children appeared in the kitchen rubbing their eyes. Twinho, the eldest, at 8 years old, Pedrinho, 6, and little Nina, only 4. Zé picked Nina up in his arms and made a funny face that drew giggles from her. "Daddy's going to get some money today, and when I come back, we'll go to the fair and buy you all some cocada," he promised. "And a doll for me?" Nina asked, her little eyes shining. "A doll for the princess, too." While Zé got ready to leave, Maria went to the window and saw Dona Francisca, the neighbor, hanging clothes in the yard next door. Francisca was a woman who knew everything that happened in the area, a sort of walking newspaper of the village. "Francisca, come here a minute." The neighbor dropped the wet cloth and came to the fence dividing the yards. "What is it, comadre? You look like you slept badly." "It's just that Zé is going to collect from Colonel Belmiro today." Francisca's face turned to shock. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph! You let him go, comadre? Everybody knows that the colonel's nerves have been on edge ever since he lost that land dispute to the judge from his shoe."
"What dispute, woman? You didn't hear?" "The Coronel tried to take some land from João Ferrugem, but the judge ruled in João's favor. They say Belmiro went into a rage, saying he'd show everyone who really commands this region." A chill twisted in Maria's stomach. "And you really think?" "Comadre, if I were you, I'd send someone after Zé. A man with anger and power is worse than a rattlesnake in heat." But when Maria ran after her husband, he had already disappeared into the dust of the road. The medal of St. John swayed on his chest as he walked with determination toward the Bariguda ranch. In the ranch yard, where the sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil, Zé Caboclo waited for 3 hours under the shade of a huaziro tree. In his calloused hands, he held a wrinkled paper, the proof of what Colonel Belmiro owed him. Other workers crossed the yard and greeted Zé with discreet nods. Everyone knew he was there to collect a debt, and everyone knew that was dangerous. One of them, named Mundinho, approached and whispered, "Zé, the Coronel's in a dark mood today. Yesterday he beat the cowhand's son just because the boy let a calf escape. Are you sure you want to mess with him?" "Zé, I'm not messing with anyone. I just want to receive what's mine." Zé listened to a friend, Receiving money from the Colonel was never anyone's problem. The problem is when a man goes to collect. Munginho stepped away when he saw Belmiro coming out of the veranda of the Casa Grande. Colonel Belmiro Gouveia was a large man with a prominent belly and a graying mustache that did nothing to hide his cruel smile. He always wore a black coat, even in the heat, as if he wanted to show that even the weather didn't dare bother him. "Colonel Belmiro," shouted Zé when he saw the man approaching. "I've come to settle the harvest accounts."
The Colonel stopped in front of the sharecropper and looked him up and down as if he were inspecting an animal in the corral. "The accounts!" The Colonel laughed, and his laughter echoed through the yard in a sinister way. "You have nothing to settle with me, you goat. Your crop was a disgrace. Didn't even pay for the land you used." Zé Caboclo felt his blood boil. 2 years of hard work, waking before the rooster crowed, sleeping only after the stars appeared. His calluses had bled during the weeding season, but he never complained. And now that man dared to say he had no right to anything? "Colonel, you know that's not true. My crop yielded 40 sacks of corn and 25 of beans. It's all written here." He showed the paper. "Paper? You think I care about the goat's paper?" It was then that something changed in the air. Even the Colonel's jagunzos, men accustomed to violence, sensed things were about to cross a line. Severino Kang, who was somewhat related to Zé on his mother's side, stepped forward. "Colonel, the man is just asking for what you yourself promised." "You want to get involved too, Severino?" Belmiro turned his red, rage-filled eyes toward the jagunzo. "Then get back to your place and stay silent." And in an act of brutality that shocked even the hardest men there, the Colonel tore the medal from Zé's neck, pulling so violently that the chain snapped and caught the skin of the sharecropper's throat. "My St. John!" Zé cried desperately, clutching the bleeding wound. "Colonel, that medal belonged to my mother." "Your mother was filth, and your St. John too." And the Colonel threw the medal to the ground, stumping it with his boot until it was completely crushed into the red dust. At that moment, something broke in the air. It wasn't just the medal. It was the very soul of the Sertão screaming against such disrespect. Even the thrushes stopped singing, as if nature itself had paused to witness the barbarity. Zé Caboclo, a gentle man who had never raised his voice at anyone, felt a courage he never knew lived inside him. "You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have stepped on my mother's medal. You had no right." The Colonel pulled the pechera from his belt, and the sunlight glinted on the blade glinted under the sunlight. "I do whatever I want on my land, with my people." What happened next was too fast for the eyes, too slow for the heart. The blade entered Zé's chest 3 times, 1 on the left side, 2 on the right. The sharecropper fell to his knees beside the trampled medal, his blood mixing with the red dust of the courtyard. "Father in heaven," those were the last words of the sharecropper as he looked at the shattered medal. "Forgive him, for he doesn't know what he has done." When Zé Caboclo collapsed to the side, a sepulchral silence took over the farm. The wind stopped completely. The leaves of the huazero tree stood still, as if nature itself had paused to witness the barbarity. Even the vultures, flying high above, seemed frozen in the air, as if awaiting an explanation that would never come. Severino Kang removed his hat in respect. Other workers did the same. Munginho murmured a quiet prayer. Everyone knew they had just witnessed not only a murder, but a profanation. In that dusty courtyard, under the scorching sun of the backlands, an honest man had died simply for wanting to receive what was rightfully his, and along with him, a piece of the faith that the Sertanejos held in the justice of the powerful also died. The news spread faster than a bent-winged swift.
It was Mundinho who carried it, running down the dirt road with his heart in his throat. When he knocked on Maria's door, she was preparing lunch, waiting for her husband to return with the money and maybe some coconut sweets for the children. "Donna Maria!" Mundinho could barely speak, breathless from the run. "Donna Maria! Something terrible happened!" The plate Maria was holding slipped from her hands and shattered on the packed earth floor. She didn't need to hear the rest. Mundinho's eyes already said everything. "Maisé," she whispered as her legs gave out. "I'm really sorry, Donna Maria. The Colonel, he killed Zé Caboclo, stabbed him."
Maria's screams echoed throughout the entire village. It was a cry that came from the depths of the soul, a lament so raw that it made the dogs howl and the children hide behind their mother's skirts. Donna Francisca arrived running along with other neighbors, but no one knew what to say. When Maria reached the courtyard of the farm, it was already too late. Zé Caboclo lay on the ground, eyes closed, his shirt soaked with blood. Beside him, the medal of St. John was unrecognizable, nothing more than a crushed piece of metal, like an old coin someone had hammered. "Zé, my love!" Maria threw herself over her husband's body, and her sobbing was so deep it sent chills through even the toughest men there. The 3 young children arrived running after their mother, brought by Donna Francisca, who couldn't keep them at home. Toninho, the oldest, at only 8, stopped in front of his father and asked in a trembling voice, "Mama, why is Daddy sleeping on the ground?" Maria couldn't answer. How could she explain to a child that his father had died simply for wanting to receive what was his? How could she tell him that in the backlands, honesty was sometimes a crime worse than theft? Pedrinho, 6 years old, began to cry without fully understanding what was happening. Little Nana, only 4, knelt beside her father and tried to wake him up, shaking his arm. "Daddy, wake up! You promised me a doll!" At that moment, Maria's heart finally broke completely. She picked her daughter up and whispered, "Daddy went to heaven, my girl. He's with Grandma now." Colonel Belmiro had locked himself inside the big house, but his gunmen still patrolled the courtyard. Severino Cangotti, who was distantly related to Zé Caboclo on his mother's side, approached Maria and whispered, "Comadre, take the kids and disappear from here. The Colonel, he's saying Zé died because he tried to steal from him." "Steal?" Maria lifted her eyes, red from so much crying. "Steal what was rightfully his?" "I know, comadre. I saw everything," Severino whispered. "Zé didn't do anything wrong. He only wanted his payment. But the Colonel has his word, and we have nothing." Maria picked up the crushed medal and pressed it against her chest. She could still feel the warmth of her husband's blood on it. That was when something changed inside her. She was no longer the submissive Maria. She was now a woman who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "Severino, do you know anyone who carries messages to the cangasso?" The gunman widened his eyes. "Comadre, for the love of God, you can't be thinking of that." "Can't I?" Maria stood up, still holding the medal. "My husband died for nothing. My children were left orphans for nothing. And I'm supposed to stay silent? Severino, you've known me since I was a girl. I am a woman of my word. If there's no justice on earth, I look for it in hell." Severino knew there was no point trying to convince her.
When a woman from the Sertão made up her mind, not even Saint Peter could change it. He looked around to make sure no one was listening and whispered, "There's a man in Eshu who sometimes carries messages to the band, Tico Mulato. But Maria, think well, calling Lampião is like calling a wildfire. He doesn't tell the guilty from the innocent." "Did Belmiro make distinctions when he killed my husband in front of his children?" Maria dug a small hole beside the still fresh pool of blood and buried the medal there. "This medal will stay here until my Zé is avenged. It's a vow."
That same night, after they held a simple wake for Zé Caboclo in the village church, Maria made a decision that would change her life forever. She left the children with Dona Francisca and walked into the darkness toward the city of Eshu. The journey on foot took 2 hours. Maria walked along the dusty dirt road, illuminated only by the waning moon. With every step, she felt the weight of the crushed metal she carried in the pocket of her skirt. It was all that remained of her husband, all that was left of the life they had built together. Eshu was a small town, but lively even at night. Maria asked about Chico Mulatto in a tavern at the town's entrance. The owner, a middle-aged man with an unfriendly face, looked at her suspiciously. "What do you want with Chico Mulatto, woman?" "I have an important message." "What kind of message?" Maria took a deep breath. She knew there was no turning back after the words she was about to say. "For the cangaceiro." The man stared at her for a long moment. Maria was a simple woman, dressed in black, her face marked by suffering. She didn't look dangerous, but in the Sertão, appearances were deceiving. "Chico lives in the last house on the back street, blue house with the wooden gate. But listen well, woman, if you're lying or spying, you won't leave Eshu alive." Maria found the house without difficulty. Chico was a thin man, dark-skinned with sharp eyes. He had a reputation for being discreet and trustworthy, essential qualities for someone who moved between the legal world and the cangaceiro. "What does a lady like you want with me at this hour of the night?" he asked suspiciously. "They killed my husband today. Colonel Belmiro Gouveia murdered him for collecting 2 contos de res that were rightfully his." Chico winced. He knew the Coronel's reputation. "And who do you want me to take a message to?" "To the man who brings justice when the law doesn't. To Lampião." "Lady, do you know what you're asking? Lampião isn't some miracle-working saint. He's fire that burns everything in its path." "My husband was a good man, an honest worker. He died with a St. John medal trampled at his side. If that doesn't deserve justice, then nothing does." Chico looked into Maria's eyes and saw determination he rarely encountered. It wasn't blind hatred. It was a thirst for justice that came from the depths of her soul. "All right, I'll deliver the message, but I can't guarantee anything. Lampião decides who he avenges and who he doesn't. Just ask him to remember that in the Sertão, whoever sows injustice must reap the storm." 3 days later, while Maria was preparing her husband's body for the final burial, a boy appeared at the door. It was Chico's son. "Dona Maria, my father sent me to say that the message was delivered." Maria felt her heart race. "And Lampião said," the boy swallowed hard, "that those who kill poor workers in front of their children don't deserve to sleep in peace. He's coming." When the boy left, Maria looked at the small mound of earth where the medal was buried. For a moment, she felt as if something was shining beneath the soil, as if St. John had heard her prayer. But that night, Alone in the room she had shared with Zay for 10 years, Maria wondered for the first time if she had done the right thing. She had called Lampião, but had she perhaps summoned something worse than injustice itself? The wind howled through the wooden beams of the house, and she swore she could hear her husband's voice whispering, "Be careful, Maria. Vengeance is a fire that burns the one who lights it." But it was too late to turn back. The message had been sent, and Lampião was already on his way.
Back on the Araripe Plateau, where time seemed to flow differently between the ancient rocks, Lampião received the message on a clear afternoon. The band had been camped for 2 weeks in the perfect hiding place, full of natural caves with multiple escape routes and clean water running between the stones. The messenger was João Nené, one of the trusted men who moved between the legal world and the cangaço. "Virgulino, there's a woman in Barriguda who wants to speak with you. Her husband was killed by Colonel Belmiro Gouveia." The name made Lampião pause as he cleaned his rifle. It had been a long time since he had heard anything about Belmiro Gouveia. Many years had passed since their paths had first crossed, but some wounds never heal. "Belmiro Gouveia," he murmured, and the other cangaceros noticed that something had changed in the chief's expression. Corisco, who was fixing the horse's harness, looked up. He had known Lampião for years and could recognize that look. It was the same expression he had before deciding someone was going to die. "Do you know this colonel, Virgulino?" "I know him." Lampião set the rifle aside and leaned against a rock. "João Nené, tell the story properly. I want every detail." João Nené recounted everything: the sharecropper killed for collecting a debt, the trampled metal, the desperate widow. When he finished, Lampião remained silent for a long time, fidgeting with the rifle's trigger, looking as if he were seeing ghosts. "Do you know why I know this name?" he asked the cangaceros gathered around the fire. "Belmiro Gouveia was the first man who taught me what pure evil was." Dada, who was preparing dinner, stopped stirring the beans and paid attention. It was rare for Lampião to speak of the past. "How do you mean, Virgulino?" Lampião stood and began pacing in circles around the fire, as he did when he was deeply agitated. The light of the flames danced across his face, casting shadows that looked like ghosts of old memories. "I was 17 years old." He began to speak, and his voice came out different, lower, as if he were speaking to himself. "My father, José Ferreira, had a debt with Belmiro. It wasn't much, 50,000 reis, but for a poor man, any debt is a lot. At that time, my father was a respected man, an honest worker, never owing anything to anyone. But there was a terrible drought in 1895, and he had to borrow money from the Colonel so he wouldn't lose the farm. Corisco threw more wood onto the fire, sending a shower of sparks rising toward the stars. And then your father couldn't pay." "No, he couldn't. The drought killed everything. Even the mandacares dried up. My father went to Belmiro to explain the situation, to ask for more time. It was a Saturday afternoon. The whole family was at home." Lampião paused for a long moment, as if the words were too heavy to speak. "Belmiro appeared at our house riding a bay horse with 2 jagunços. He didn't come to collect the debt. He came to humiliate us. He said my father was a pig, that our family was worse than cattle. He said it in front of my mother, in front of my sisters. My father, a man of honor, lowered his head in shame." "And you didn't do anything?" asked Dada, knowing the chief's temperament. "I was a boy, Dada. 17 years old, but still a boy. I just stood there watching my father, the man I respected most in the world,
turn into a dog with its tail between its legs. Belmiro left our house laughing, riding his bay horse, and my father was never the same. Lampião sat down again, but his hands trembled slightly. "Why did you never tell this before?" asked Corisco. "Because all these years I was looking for a justification not to kill Belmiro. He had never been a soldier, never hunted the cangaso. He was just a rich colonel who liked to humiliate the poor."
Lampião picked up a small stone and tossed it into the fire, making the flames dance. But now he killed a man for collecting what was rightfully his, killed him in front of his children, trampled a saint's medal. Dada served a plate of beans to Lampião, who ate in silence. Everyone knew that when the chief was like this, thoughtful and quiet, someone was going to die. "And there's one more thing," Lampião smiled, but it was a smile that chilled the blood. "Remember what Belmiro did to my father? He humiliated a man in front of his family. Now I'm gonna do the same to him." Corisco and Dada exchanged glances. They'd known Lampião for years, but had never seen him with this thirst for personal vengeance. "When do we go?" asked Corisco. "Not tomorrow. Not the day after either." Lampião stood and walked to the edge of the camp, where he could see the distant lights of the village. "Let's make the colonel sweat a little. Let him know that we know. Fear is part of justice." "How do you mean?" asked Dada. "João Nene, go back there and spread the news. Lampião knows what Belmiro did. Let everyone talk. In 3 days the news will reach him. Then we pay a visit." That night, Lampião dreamed of his father. In the dream, the old man sat beneath the juazeiro tree of their old home, his head held high and his gaze steady, as it had been before Colonel Belmiro Gouveia humiliated him. "Son, vengeance is a dish best served cold, but sometimes the cold burns more than fire. Father, I should have done something that day. I was just a boy, Virgulino, but now I am a man, and the time has come to show that in the Sertão, whoever sows humiliation reaps the storm." Back at the camp, when Lampião awoke, he knew exactly what he was going to do. Not just an execution, it would be a lesson that would remain in the memory of the Sertão for generations. 3 days later, just as Lampião had predicted, the news reached Belmiro. It was Severino Cangaço who delivered it, his voice trembling with fear. "Colonel, I'm hearing some talk around. They say Lampião knows about the story of Zé Caboclo." The colonel was drinking coffee on the veranda of the Casa Grande when he heard the news. The cup shook in his hand. "Lampião? What does Lampião have to do with this, Colonel?" "Apparently, the widow sent a message to the cangaço, and they say Virgulino took an interest in the story." For the first time in many years, the colonel felt fear. He had power over the poor in the region, Jagunços, political influence, but against Lampião, all that was worthless. "Are you sure about this information? Colonel, people are talking about it even in Exu. They say Lampião swore he will bring justice." Belmiro stood and began pacing back and forth on the veranda. His mind worked quickly, looking for a way out. "How many men do we have?" "About 15, Colonel." "That's not enough. Send for more men. I want 25 armed men at this farm by tomorrow morning." But deep down, Belmiro knew that even 50 men wouldn't make a difference against Lampião. The cangaceiro wasn't just a bandit, he was a living legend, a man who knew every inch of the Caatinga, every hideout, every shortcut. Meanwhile, in the village near the farm, news spread that made hearts beat faster. Lampião was going to bring justice for the sharecropper Zé Caboclo. People gathered on street corners, in the squares, in the bodegas, to discuss the case. At the house of Chico Ferreira,
one of the oldest men in the region, a conversation unfolded that reflected the feelings of many sertanejos. "Compadre," Chico said to his brother-in-law João Matuto, "is it right to call Lampião to handle things? Chico, answer me this. When have you ever seen a poor man win a case against a colonel in court? Never. Not once."
Then there's no other way, compadre. Zé Caboclo was a hard-working, honest man. He died for wanting receive what was rightfully his. If the justice of men didn't work, then the justice of God had to come. And do you think Lampião is God's justice? João Matuto spat on the ground and adjusted his head. "I don't know if he's from God or the devil, but I know he's the only justice that works around here." On Thursday morning, a new figure arrived in the village. Father Ciriaco, a middle-aged man who had known Zé Caboclo personally. The priest had come from Juazeiro, where he had learned about the sharecropper's death. Father Ciriaco was different from the other priests in the region. He wasn't afraid to speak against the powerful and always defended the poor. When he heard of Zé Caboclo's death, he cancelled all his appointments and came straight to the village. "Where is the widow?" he asked upon arriving. "At her house, Father, but she doesn't want to speak to anyone." The priest went to Maria's house and knocked on the wooden door. "Doña Maria, I'm Father Ciriaco. May I come in?" Maria opened the door. She was dressed in black, her eyes swollen from crying. Upon seeing the priest, she crossed herself. "Come in, Father." "Sorry for the mess, but after they killed my Zé—" "No need to apologize, my daughter. I came because I heard what happened. Zé Caboclo was a good man." "He was the best man who ever lived," Maria interrupted, her voice trembling. The priest sat on a straw chair and looked at Maria with compassion. "My daughter, I heard you sent a message to certain people." Maria lowered her eyes. "Yes, Father, I did." "You know the church does not approve of vengeance, Maria." Maria interrupted with a firmness that even surprised herself. "Answer me this, Father. If someone killed the Lord for speaking the truth, and no one did anything, what would God's angels do?" The priest remained silent for a long time. "The justice of God is different from the justice of men, my daughter." "Maybe, Father. But while God's justice hasn't arrived, sometimes we need the justice of men. And if the men of the law don't bring justice, then only the men of their own law remain." On Thursday night to Friday, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The moon was new, the sky dark as pitch. Lampião and 15 cangaceros silently arrived at the Barriguda farm. There was no resistance. Belmiro's jagunços, however brave when facing unarmed sertanejos, did not have the courage to exchange fire with the congasso. When they saw the armed shadows surrounding the Casa Grande, they dropped their weapons and surrendered. Lampião ordered all of Belmiro's men to be tied up in the same yard where Zé Caboclo had been killed. It was a deliberate symbolism. The place of injustice would become the place of justice. "Corisco, go fetch the colonel, but be careful. I want him whole for the conversation." Belmiro was brought in a nightshirt, trembling from cold and fear. When he saw Lampião, his eyes widened. The cangaceiro was dressed in full attire, leather hat, bandoliers thrust over his chest, rifle in hand. "Virgulino Ferreira," he whispered. "Look who still remembers me," Lampião smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "Colonel Belmiro Gouveia, still humiliating the poor, I see. And I didn't do anything wrong. The man tried to rob me." "Rob?" Lampião stepped forward. "Just like my father tried to rob you when he went to collect the debt at your house 20 years ago." Belmiro paled. He vaguely remembered that afternoon when he went to collect a small debt at a humble house,
but he did not remember the boy who had watched everything from a corner. "You remember, don't you?" Lampião said, going to the spot where the medal had been buried and dug it up with his own hands. "Remember how you humiliated my father in front of his family, just like you did with Zecaboclo?" The medal of St. John still had traces of dried blood, but the dented metal faintly shone in the moonlight as the torches that the congasso had lit.
Virgulino, I can pay compensation to the family. Money? Lampião laughed, but it was a laugh without joy. Do you think money can pay for what you did? Do you think it can erase the shame my father carried until he died? Do you think it pays for the blood spilled in this yard? At that moment, a crowd began to gather around the farm. The news had spread. Lampião was bringing justice for Zecaboclo. Cowboys, small farmers, ordinary people who had suffered at the hands of colonels like Belmiro came to witness. "Virgulino!" shouted an old man named Antônio Cego. "I don't forget! This man took my family's land, Lampião!" said Father Ciliaco, who had arrived from Juazeiro. "This man trampled a saint's medal! That is sacrilege! Bring justice!" A cowboy shouted, "He humiliated an honest worker!" Lampião raised his hand, asking for silence. "People, I know you have complaints against the Coronel, but today we are here because of Zecaboclo, a man who died simply for wanting to receive what was his." At that moment, the door of the Casa Grande opened and the Coronel's children appeared. 2 boys and a girl, all between 10 and 15 years old, followed by his wife, a young woman who trembled with fear. "Papa!" shouted the youngest boy. "Stay right there, boy," said Lampião, but his voice held no cruelty. "No one is going to hurt you, but you need to see who your father really is." Lampião turned to the Coronel, who was on his knees on the ground. "Coronel, you killed the man for in front of his children, trampled on a saint's medal, humiliated the man who only wanted to receive what was his. Now, in front of your children and all these people, you're going to tell me why you did it." I don't know." "You don't know?" Lampião pressed the barrel of his rifle against the Coronel's forehead. "Then let me help you remember. You did it because you are a coward, because you feel strong humiliating those who are weaker, because you think that just because you have money, you can treat people like animals." The Coronel's wife began to sob softly. His children watched in horror as their father was humiliated in the same way he had humiliated so many others. One man in the crowd shouted, "Kill him, Lampião! Bring justice!" Others agreed, but Lampião raised his hand again. "Calm down, folks. Justice must be done the right way." Lampião looked at Belmiro's children, and his expression changed slightly. "Kids, pay attention to what I'm going to say. You are not guilty of your father's crimes, but you need to know what kind of man he is." The cangaceiro turned to the Coronel's oldest son, a boy of about 15 years old. "What's your name, boy?" "Beto." "Mr. Beto, did you know that your father killed a man for collecting 2 contos de reis?" "No, sir. Papa said the man tried to steal." "Your father lied, Beto. Zecaboclo didn't try to steal anything. He only wanted to receive payment for years of honest work." Lampião showed the crumpled medal to the boy. "See this? This is the medal your father trampled. It belonged to Zecaboclo's mother, a saintly woman who never harmed anyone." The boy looked at his father, then at Lampião, and his eyes filled with tears. "Papa, is it true?" The Coronel could not answer, For the first time in his life, he felt firsthand what his victims felt. Total humiliation, absolute powerlessness. But I am not like your father, Beto. I will not kill him in front of you. That would be too cruel for you. Lampião signaled to Corisco, who took the Coronel's family inside the house. When they returned alone, Lampião took the medal from his pocket and showed it to the Coronel. A heavy silence fell around the yard. The crowd held its breath. Now it's just you and me, Coronel. Man to man. Virgulino, I can pay compensation to the family. Zé Caboclo had also begged. He begged for the medal. He begged for his life. Did you hear that? The Coronel looked at the crumbled medal and for the first time in his life felt the real weight of what he had done. It was not just a sharecropper he had killed. It was a man with a family, dreams, a story.
He was someone like him. I shouldn't have done this, he whispered. I shouldn't. Lampião raised his rifle. Colonel, in the Sertão there is a law you never understood. Whoever sows the wind reaps the storm, and you've sown storms all your life. A deep silence fell over the yard. The crowd held its breath. Even the crickets stopped singing. But before you die, Lampião said, I want you to understand one thing. I am not killing you just for Zé Caboclo. I am killing you for my father, for all the honest men you humiliated, for all the families you destroyed, Virgulino. And I want you to know that your death will not be in vain. It will serve as an example to other colonels. They will learn that in the Sertão there is justice, even if it does not come from the courts. The shot echoed across the entire farm, ricocheting off the walls of the Casa Grande and fading into the vastness of the Caatinga. When the echo died, a profound silence took over the place. Even the wind ceased to blow, as if nature itself were paying respect to that moment of justice. Lampião bent down and picked up the medal of St. John. Carefully, he cleaned it with his own handkerchief and placed it on the colonel's chest. Now you can rest, Zé Caboclo. Your medal has returned to its place. The crowd slowly began to disperse. Some men removed their hats in respect. Others made the sign of the cross. Everyone knew they had witnessed not just an execution, but a moment of justice in the Sertão. That early morning, as the band prepared to leave, Lampião went to Maria's house. She was awake, as if she knew he would come. She was dressed in black, but there was a different light in her eyes. It's done, Dona Maria. Your husband has been avenged. Maria looked at the man who was both terror and hope at the same time. In Lampião's eyes, she saw not only the feared cangaceiro, but also a man who had lost his father, who had also suffered humiliations. Thank you, Lampião, but this won't bring my Zé back. No, it won't, he agreed. But it will make other colonels think twice before humiliating hard-working people. And it will show their children that justice exists even when it seems it doesn't. As Lampião was leaving, Maria called out, Lampião, have you ever thought about stopping all this, about living in peace? He stopped at the door and stood for a moment in silence, looking at the stars that were beginning to fade with the arrival of dawn. Dona Maria, I was born for this. I was born to be the justice for those who have none. As long as there are people like Belmiro in the Sertão, there must be people like me as well. And when there are no more? Lampião smiled for the first time that night. A sad smile, but sincere. Then maybe I can rest. But until then, while God gives me strength and ammunition, I will be here. And he disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the echo of the horse's hooves and a strange sensation in the air, as if the very night had changed after that conversation. The following morning, 3 months after Belmiro's death, the village had changed completely. The first rays of sun brought not only light, but also the songs of the Bentevis, which had returned to the Juazeiro where Zecaboclo used to rest. The colonels in the region began treating their workers better, not out of kindness, but out of fear. The news of Lampião's justice had spread across the Sertão like wildfire. Seu Joaquim, an 80-year-old cowboy, recounted the story to his grandchildren under the same Juazeiro where Zecaboclo used to rest. Boys, you don't know, but this Juazeiro has seen a lot. It saw the colonel stepping on a saint's medal. It saw the blood of an honest worker soaking the soil. It saw justice being served with hot lead. And the medal, what happened to it?
Ah, the medal. The old man smiled. They say Maria kept it very carefully. Every year, on the day Zé died, she comes here, cleans the medal, and says a Our Father. And you know what? Since Lampião delivered justice, the medal returned to its original shape, as if St. John had been resurrected along with Zé Caboclo's honor. In the town of Ixu, Father Siriaco celebrated Mass every Sunday and always ended with the same reflection. My brothers, God works in mysterious ways. Sometimes He uses angels. Sometimes He uses men whom the world calls demons. What matters is that justice is done, even if it comes through the most unexpected hands. Maria never remarried. She raised the 3 children alone, always telling them the story of her father, an honest man who died simply for wanting to receive what was rightfully his. Toninho, the eldest son, grew up to be a man of his word, just like his father, always wearing a St. John medal around his neck, not the original one, which his mother kept as a relic, but a new one he wore in honor of his father. Pedrinho became a cowboy, and Nana, the little girl who cried when her father didn't come back with the promised dough, grew up to be a teacher. She taught hundreds of children to read and write, always telling the story of her grandfather, who died for the sake of justice. The Barriguda farm was sold by the colonel's widow, who left the region with her children. They say that Beto, the eldest son, grew up to be very different from his father, just, honest, and respectful to the workers. And Lampião remained Lampião. He roamed the Sertão for several more years, delivering his own brand of justice, until 1938, one dawn, in Angicos, his story came to an end, but the legends about him remained alive. When the wind blows strongly across the Caatinga, the older sertanejos still swear they hear the hooves of the cangaceiros and the voice of Lampião saying, "In the Sertão, whoever sows injustice will reap a storm." And the St. John medal? Ah, the medal. They say it was never found again after Maria died. Some swear it transformed into light and ascended to heaven. Others say it is still out there, protecting the honest workers of the Sertão. One thing is certain. After that night, no colonel in the region ever stepped on a saint's medal again, because in the Sertão, some lessons are eternal. And the lesson of Zé Caboclo, Maria, and Lampião was one of them. Justice may be delayed, but it always finds a way. Comes by crooked paths, but it always arrives. Always. And you, what would you have done in Maria's place? Swallowed the injustice, or called Lampião to deliver justice? Leave your comment below, because this story touches something very deep in the channel's soul. How far would we go to defend what is right? Was Lampião's revenge justice, or just more violence? Is there even a difference between the two when the love fails? Share your opinion. I want to know what you think. If this story gave you chills, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The Night Tales is full of tales like this, where the line between justice and revenge is thinner than a razor's edge. And subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any, because the next ones will be even more impactful. See you next time.